I made this handout, which is something I made for the youth last year in Sunday school. And so, y'all all have them. Okay.
Some of us.
And this is a modern kind of icon, and it's my favorite for connecting the story of Ruth. And so it's Ruth and Naomi. I like it because Ruth there on the side has darker skin. And so you can very noticeably tell, like in our culture's way of saying, this is a foreigner who is not from the land. And I love it in the back. It's where you lodge, I will lodge. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God, which is this great vow that Ruth makes. In chapter 1, it's just a very powerful statement. And so I love this picture of it. And I got it a few years ago, and I can't find this one online anymore, and I'm glad that I saved it in my files. I have two other things I'm going to say, and then we'll go ahead and pray first. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
My God, we thank you that we're done with Judges, and that we can read the book of Ruth and hear her story, and the story of Naomi, and the story of Boaz, and how that ties into our own stories as we wait for King David and eventually for Jesus. Be with us this day and all days. Amen.
Amen.
I'm going to silence my phone because I did it. Okay, here's our picture for Ruth. And instead of just calling it the book of Ruth, I'm calling it the stories of Ruth and Naomi. When I was in school, we had a professor, and I'm not sure why he talked about Ruth because he was our English professor, but I guess when you're at a Bible college, your English class is also a Bible class. But what he told us is that the story of Ruth is actually the story of Naomi. And so if you go through and you read it and think of Naomi as the main character, it really enlightens the way that you sort of look at it. I can't get rid of Ruth as being the main character, considering it's named after her. And she is the main actor in the story, but the one who makes most of the choices is actually Naomi and not Ruth. And I'll encourage you to read it another way as we go through it. Think of Naomi as a placeholder for all of Israel. And the characters kind of take turns at different points, but Ruth and Boaz end up representing like God's love and God's protection over Naomi. And God's loyalty towards them. So I really like that. It's kind of a cool way of looking at it. And even when we play the Bible Project video, they'll somewhat reference it, and I'll bring that up throughout too. Let me just tell you one more thing about this, and I'll say this when we get to it in the slide, but for me, the three main themes in the book of Ruth is loyalty, inclusion, and God's providence. When I have read this in the past, I have been more moved by the idea of loyalty. At other times, I've been more moved by that idea of inclusion. That Ruth, who is this foreigner and doesn't belong, is brought in and is painted as this like perfect light of this person with a pure heart. Right now, in this season, I'm really moved by the idea of God's providence. One thing that's interesting about Ruth and Esther, both books, is God is not a major character in either of the stories. And throughout the book of Ruth, the narrator never says God. Some of the characters do a few times, but God is still orchestrating things together. And there's this hidden tense. It doesn't translate quite well as English. And I'll pull out a couple of the moments when it comes up. But they try to translate it like Ruth happened to come across Boaz's field, and she happened to be there. And it's this weird tense that's like, it's God ordaining these events kind of to come together. And so I like that about Ruth too. It's about God's providence, even when it looks hidden. And I find that really comforting right now, that even when I don't know what's going on, God is still working things together. Here's more coming right here. And then I want to show you where we're going to be next week, because we're going to be in the story of Esther. We will go through it through 4 weeks. And I do not often say this, and so I'm going to say this. If you wanted to bring $5 to go towards buying some pictures for our Esther class, I would accept it because there is this collection, and it's incredibly expensive. And because It's this mosaic right here. So this is an artist, and she actually makes these mosaics. They're life-size. You can purchase them for $700. And I'm not, this is a preview of it, but there is some other art from her collection that I want to use. And I don't have a budget for this class. So if you wanted to bring $5, I would let it go towards that. And we will do that in 4 weeks. You don't have to bring in money. It's free, but I would accept it. Okay, let's jump into the book of Ruth. And I want to start with their names. In every language, in Hebrew, in Aramaic, in Greek, in Latin, the book of Ruth is always called the scroll or the book of Ruth. It has no other names. And so Ruth is an important figure. If you weren't here a few minutes ago, I talked about a professor I had in school that said the main character was Naomi, which is an interesting way of reading it. And she is also a major character, but it is always given with the name Ruth. The name Ruth means companion. The name Boaz means strength. And Naomi has two names in the book. At first, her name is Delight, or something like that. Pleasant, maybe, would be how you would translate it. Most of the book, though, she goes by the name Mara, which means bitter. And at the end of the book, she gets restored to her name. And if you weren't here a few minutes ago, too, I mentioned if you think of Naomi as like this placeholder of Israel, someone who went through hardship, and it was through like the loyalty of Ruth or the protection of Boaz, kind of representing God's love and protection and loyalty to Israel, gets restored. That's sort of what's happening with Naomi. So her name is Delight, then it is bitter.
What does Ruth mean? I'm sorry.
Ruth means companion, which represents her quite well. In placement in the canon, I want to show you this. So in our Bibles, Ruth is right after the book of Judges and right before the book of Samuel, which makes sense because that's if you were to lay the book out chronologically in its sort of history of when these things are taking place. However, in the Tanakh, which is the Jewish Bible, I want to show you where it is because it's not in the Torah section. It's not in the prophet section, which is probably where you would expect it to be during this like history section. It's in the writings or the poetry. And that's important to note the way that the book of Ruth had been understood. It's part of the poetry. It's part of the writings. It's also really cool because this book immediately follows Proverbs and Job. And the way that the Tanakh is laid out is there's two columns that are right beside each other. And so you read the story of Job, which is a story about God's providence and caring for Israel and stuff, or Job, which is also a picture of Israel, and Proverbs 31. Does anyone know what people tend to call Proverbs 31 or the main character? Yeah, the Proverbs 31 woman is
the good woman, the good wife.
Yeah, the chapter is about wisdom, but wisdom is a female character in Proverbs 31, and Ruth immediately follows it. Ruth is the picture of everything that is described in chapter 31 of Proverbs. Also, you might just find this sort of fun to know. Ruth is in a collection called the Five Scrolls. We call it the Megalith. And that includes Ruth, the Song of Songs, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. They're all read together in this poetry collection. And we'll talk about that in a second for what type of genre this is. I already mentioned this, but the main themes here are inclusion, loyalty, and God's hidden providence. So God is working things together even though God's not speaking to the characters through an angel or through a prophet or through a judge. There's no rushing of the Spirit coming on anyone. There's no burning bush moments. There's this quiet orchestration of God's work happening. And that work is dependent on the characters following through with how to follow God for how they know how to, which is given in the law. It's also really cool because Ruth and Boaz are the great grandparents of King David. We have talked about that before, how they end up in the lineage to David, and David is in the lineage to Jesus. And this book has sort of been seen as this Powerful book for welcoming the immigrant, mixed families, and also for feminist leaders, as you see Ruth and Naomi as these strong female characters. Ruth is also a book that is used in a lot of queer theology as well. And if you have questions about why that is, you can ask me afterwards. The short summary is that, and I don't think this is a good reading of it, but they look at Ruth and Naomi as like a lesbian couple or a non-traditional family structure and whatever. I have a little magazine upstairs from the Diocese of North Carolina. It's a magazine about them. I think that's not a good way of reading it, but it is a powerful book of loyalty and inclusion of the immigrant. Author and dating. Ruth has an unknown author. Some people say it was possibly written by a woman. There is no internal or external evidence of that. They just say that because there are strong female characters that are the main actors. I guess because men can't write strong female characters. I'm not really sure why that is. But it does have an incredibly different focus than other texts. For instance, we have just read Joshua and Judges. In Joshua and Judges, if you come across a Midianite, a Moabite, Canaanite, Perizzite, what do you do to them? You kill them. Ruth is a Moabite, and she's the one who knows God the most and pictures God the most. And so it has an incredibly different focus. The other really powerful thing about Ruth, and you read it in the first sentence, it says, in the days of the judges. Like, this is taking place in the same, like, while they're going out and supposed to be killing everyone. Now Ruth is this strong character, and so that's pretty awesome. Dating-wise, author or scholars would put it sometime after King David in the early monarchy, or in the post-exilic era, possibly being very late under Persian rule, which is probably a more realistic date. So that would be after like 586. It would be sometime in the 500s or maybe even in the 400s. 586 is when Jerusalem gets conquered by the Babylonians. They carry off some of the Israelites and they end up in Babylon for 70 years. After 70 years, as like the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which are right here, some authors even think, or some scholars think Ezra, Nehemiah, and Ruth are part of the same kind of school. But they come back to Israel and rebuild the temple. What happened after the exile is suddenly there's no such thing as Israelites anymore because they're not living in Israel. The people who used to be Israelites become Jews. That's when the term Jew becomes a thing. And so their identity is no longer an ethnic identity, it's a religious identity. And when they come back into the land, it's not as big of a deal to marry foreigners, but it became a much more prevalent topic to ask about because people are marrying Babylonians. Or they come back in the land, and the land's not with other Israelites anymore. It's been mixed with other people groups. And so marriages become mixed. And so the book of Ruth is very relevant to that as a conversation when it's taking place. Any questions on that? Okay. Literary style. This is a type of literature that we would call a Hebrew short story. It's its own type of genre. You could think of it sort of like a folk tale. A lot of people will try to get in like an argument, is the book of Ruth a historical fiction or is it a historical narrative? It is neither. It is a Hebrew short story and it has elements of both. And so a lot of the things that are going to happen in here, they are written like a historical fiction, but we would say it's like a historical narrative in the sense that these are real characters living about their life. But some of the details, like we have found out in a lot of our reading of the Old Testament, don't match. Like there's no record of a big famine taking place in Bethlehem in a displaced family. It would be incredibly unusual to have a foreigner welcomed into a community at this time, especially when everyone's going around killing each other. And so it's a Hebrew short story. What that does mean, though, and this is what's awesome about the book of Ruth, is it's an incredibly poetic book, and it's read in a new way every generation. And so the book of Ruth is one that every generation is invited to read again. And so you can ask yourself when you read it, well, am I like Naomi in this story? Am I the one who's lived through a bitter life? and I don't know how to have delight or pleasantness anymore. Naomi has to learn to see the good again, and we see her recovery through depression. I mean, that's a very powerful story. You could also ask, am I like Ruth? Am I the one who doesn't belong, and I am under a microscope of every single action that I do? And I have to be very careful to be sure I still look honorable in my actions. You could ask, are you like Boaz? Are you the one who is wealthy and well off and can provide help to other people, bring others under your protection? It's a very powerful story, and every generation is invited to read the book of Ruth again. And it's part of its sort of genre that gets reread. So Netflix did a film about it last year, and I have not seen it, but it's more like a romance. Ruth is not a romance, and we'll talk about that as we go through it, even though a lot of people think about it like that. Some of its significance or reception, it is read during the festival of Shavuot in Judaism today. That is the festival of weeks. That just so happens to line up when Pentecost was in the book of Acts. But Pentecost and Shavuot are not always the same. Pentecost is 50 days after Easter. The festival of weeks is a harvest festival. But just think about it, when the early church was having Pentecost, they would have read Ruth that week. And so that's kind of cool to know. And it's still read every year during the festival of the weeks. And it is in nearly every single canon of the Old Testament, which is interesting because God is not, as we said, an active character, and God never speaks. The word Yahweh is never used. The narrator never mentions God. Only the characters lightly mention God. And here's the 4 chapters that are on your handout. We will watch this video at the end of class. And I wanted to show you, too, this cool mosaic, which was like $400 to buy. I did not buy it. But I did get this preview, and you can't see it because it's not high resolution, but all of this has the scenes kind of taking place. And so I just really like this piece of art. And I want to just draw your attention. We'll look at this one again, but where we begin, the story begins with death. Where the story ends is with new life. And there is a lot of symmetry that happens in this book. Everything that happens in the first chapter gets undone in the last chapter. And chapters 2 and 3 also have some symmetry that happens in the sense like Naomi and Ruth make a plot at the beginning of both chapters, and then they have to end up waiting, and then someone else comes to their rescue, which is Boaz. And so, awesome book, great piece of poetry. And any questions before we dig in? Great. Okay. This is happening in the days of the judges. A famine strikes Bethlehem. I'm going to bring up some of the names in this book because they're quite relevant. Bethlehem is house of bread. This is the place where you go to be fed. It's where you would grow a lot of the grain if you're living in Israel. It is incredibly ironic that a famine has struck the land. And this is another one of those moments where we see like God behind the scenes, because Israel has forsaken God, and so they're not fed anymore. And so this is one of those moments behind the scenes. In a somewhat strange event, this Israelite ends up moving. Elimelech, whose name is "My God is King." This is Naomi's husband. It's also very ironic. This guy who says, "God is my king," leaves God's land for another land because he didn't trust God would take care of them, which is versus the characters like we have seen before, those who trust in God no matter the circumstance, like Ruth, are the ones that we're supposed to emulate, not him. He leaves. He leaves Israel. He leaves God's land, goes to Moabites. His wife is Naomi. Her name is Delight. You might have a Bible that also says pleasant or something like that, but it's all happy terms. It doesn't stay that way. And they have 2 sons. We don't care about their names. Naomi's husband dies, and then their sons die after 10 years. And I want to draw your attention, because when you've read or seen pictures of Ruth, she might look like she's like 19 years old. She's a little bit older than that. She's already been married for 10 years. She has traveled, in the day across the world into a new land. And so she'll end up coming into a new land. She's an experienced, well-versed person. She's lived through some life. She's not a young lady anymore. She has no kids, and that's a significant detail. That is also, if you're reading this, you would think, poor Naomi, God's favor is not with her because she has no grandkids. And kids are a representation of God's favor towards you. And so now we have Naomi is left in this foreign land, and she has no husband and no sons, which means she has no future security. She is hopeless. And that leads to where we're going to end up. Naomi is going to return to Bethlehem, go back to Israel, because the famine is over and she has nothing left for her there in Moab. And so she tells her daughter-in-laws, go back to your houses. If you were a woman and you were married, you had no kids, you had no future security, and your husband dies, you would go back to your father. Ruth does something incredibly unexpected where she stays. There's also a very beautiful and intimate Hebrew word, which is she clung to her. It's not like romantic intimate, but it's heartfelt intimacy. It's this loyalty that just goes beyond all logic. She is going to go with Naomi into this land that she doesn't know, where she doesn't belong. And remember in the story of the Judges, where she might be killed. That's what's supposed to happen to her if she goes there. But she goes anyway because she's loyal to Naomi. And we're going to get to this moment of the great vow, which I want to see if anyone would want to read verses 16 through 18.
I'll read it if I can find it.
All right, we will wait for Marilyn to read it. This is the vow. You can also you can buy a plaque of it. It's a very powerful statement that she gives. It's not very helpful, but in my Bible, it's page 411.
And she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if even death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more.
It's this very powerful vow. And I'm just captured by it. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. And then the very dramatic statement, and this is where this stands out. Your God will be my God. Ruth has fully put her flag into, Naomi's camp, but also with God's camp. And that's where this one really stands out. Ruth is abandoning everything of her past, and she is putting full-fledged allegiance into God. A lot of people will compare Ruth to Rahab as someone who's, a foreigner that has converted and followed God. But Ruth does more than that. Rahab turns to the side of power. Ruth turns away from safety and power and protection and abandons it all to follow God. She is it's a radical statement. And so here she gives this sevenfold vow. She isn't just joining the family. She joins the covenant of Israel. She becomes Israel here. She becomes part of Israel. That's one reason I love the book of Ruth, and it's so much more fun and pleasant to read than Judges or Joshua, because we look at this form and we go, yeah, she rocks. Let's be like her instead of, the other thought. She does more than just commit herself to Naomi and Naomi's God and Naomi's people. She pledges a curse on herself if she turns away from this vow. So she takes this very seriously. And suddenly, this outsider is the one that we are to emulate. She becomes our new role model. Did you have something, Allie? No, okay. And so then we're going to see their arrival at Bethlehem. And this is a picture from a private collection. It's from the 1930s. Makes me think about Great Gatsby. But here's Ruth. She's the talk of the town. She is the new thing. And so a lot of gossip comes. And this is going to lead to Naomi. Here's Naomi. You can see her even looking away in shame. And as we end chapter 1, they ask, is that Naomi? It's been at least 10 years since she's been there. It's been a while. And she is so ashamed. She says, do not call me Naomi, call me bitter, because the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I mean, it's this sad, sunk moment. And so as we go through the story of Ruth, we're also journeying along with Naomi through this like time of depression. And so, one way of reading this is about what do we do with each other in sadness? We'll be like Ruth for those who are sad. Stick with them through it all, even when they can't even call themselves their own name. She says, I'm just bitter about everything. And that's how we see Naomi at first. And so in this very true sense of the way, she is emptied of everything. She was emptied of food at the beginning, but now she is emptied of happiness. She has nothing really left. That will all get undone in chapter 4, and it's happy. And so, hold on. We're going to go in chapter 2 and meet Boaz. My Bible just says Ruth meets Boaz. That's the only section title for this whole chapter. But there's a little bit more that goes on here. This is a picture of Boaz. It's not my favorite in the sense of style. I'm not always in love with European paintings, but I did put this one here because what do you notice about his age?
Whoa.
He's an old guy. Okay. For some reason, a lot of people present the story of Ruth, and that little film was like this, and it's not wrong, but it's like it's a story of two star-crossed lovers that are like in their 20s. That is not the story that happens here. This is not a romance story with Naomi and Ruth or with Boaz and Ruth. It's a story of loyalty. And we're going to see that with Boaz. And so he's probably an older guy, is the sense that we get. He's described as a worthy man. That's quite, literally is a man of standing. And he's from the same clan that Naomi's husband was from. And that becomes an important detail. And another just few things about him. He was probably wealthy. We know he was a landowner. Not everyone was a landowner. So he is in a line of firstborn sons. He is the leader of his family group, is what we're learning about him. And the text says that she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. And I put hashtag hidden providence because it's a very unusual Hebrew tense. If you are someone who ever read the King James Version and you read John chapter 4 where Jesus comes to the woman at the well, it's another one of those moments, this time from Greek, but it's like a weird tense. And it's like, I must needs go through Samaria. That's how the King James translated it. And it's this weird tense that doesn't exist in English, and it's hard to translate. And we see that happening here. She just so happens to come across this field, and she just so happens to be in the field where Boaz is, and it just so happens to be the harvest season. It's this unusual Hebrew, and it's not a just so happens. This was something God is orchestrating together. I like that because of this book. And here, Ruth is going to take the role of this very humble servant to provide for her mother-in-law, her bitter mother-in-law, who can't provide for herself because she has now gotten older and picking grain is hard work. Boaz is going to arrive and he greets his workers with "The Lord be with you." So we see he is a godly employer and a good Episcopalian. And so Boaz here is going to hear of Ruth's reputation, of all that she has done for Naomi. She left her family, her land, her gods, and everything to take care for Naomi. And so he goes to her and takes care of her. This is some powerful things, and we have to explain a little bit about how agricultural structures work, and we're about to talk about something from, it's Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. It's called the law of the gleaning of the fields, or at least that's what I call it. I don't know if that's actually what it's called, but it's Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. And just some cultural expectations here. So this comes from that Leviticus passage. If you owned land and you are growing hay and straw, grain, that was why I wanted straw. I was going to give you some. And then I had Twizzlers for the people last night, and I forgot it today. So if I remember, Twizzlers might show up on Sunday or something. You were supposed to intentionally leave grain behind for other people to come and care for it. To pick it, to get it on their own. And if you were someone like a foreigner, or you were poor, or a widow, or an orphan, you had no means to feed yourself, care for yourself, you would go through the fields, and you could think of it like if the whole parish hall is one big field, Marcia's field might be over there, and they have wildflowers, and my field's over there, and we have organic potatoes or something. I don't know. And then Marilyn's over there, and she has flowers. You would work your way across all of the fields. You wouldn't stay in one place. And so if you're a landowner, you care for those who don't own land by intentionally being inefficient or unprofitable. You intentionally leave things behind for other people. And if you were one who didn't own land, you didn't stay in one field because you're not taking advantage of someone's field. You go through multiple spots. Boaz says, stay in my field. That's a powerful statement. He's saying, take advantage of me, stay here, and stay with the women for safety. Also, drink my water. Okay, this comes up with the story of the woman at the well in Samaria in John 4, where she pulls, like, Jesus is like, let me drink from your water. I don't have a cup. He wasn't being rude and saying, like, go do the work for me. A Jewish man would never drink from the spoon of a foreigner. They didn't have water bottles. They would have ladles in the well, and they would drink from it. You don't drink from the spoon of a foreigner. Boaz is letting Ruth drink from his spoon. I mean, that's powerful. It's repulsive, like culturally repulsive. And so this is like, yeah, it's really cool. And so here she is here.
Sounds like a love story.
Yeah, see, okay, but we're going to talk about that in a second. It's more than love. I mean, it is love, but it is a love story, but it's not like a romance. It's like they've got good hearts. Yeah.
Why didn't Naomi just go to Boaz? She's part of the family, and he's so accepting of the family. He knew that she was back in Israel.
Because that wouldn't make a good story.
Yeah, but you would think she would return to Israel and go to Boaz, and this was really part of the family. So
yeah, well, so we're gonna see there. She doesn't know who Boaz is yet. So it just so happened they came across this field, and then they learn who he is. And we'll see that happen.
She doesn't know, but Naomi knows.
Not yet. Because Ruth is just walking around through some fields.
Oh, I thought.
And they could be miles of fields, and she's in there, and then like runs into Boaz, and he's like, "Oh, I know who you are." Yeah, so it's.
She should have said, "Go to Boaz," but okay.
They didn't have a family tree line. There was no Facebook to look up your cousins.
But
I saw
Boaz had heard of her.
They had, because she was awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe pretty too, but
Okay.
I have it. Yeah.
I thought they had to leave the outside borders of all of the fields for the pool.
Yes.
They couldn't
Yeah.
pick that up.
So they would leave the edges of the fields and stuff. And we're going to talk about that. Oh,
Well, now, how did Boaz know who Ruth was?
well, for one thing, she's not an Israelite.
Yeah.
So she stands out. She speaks a different language. She maybe had darker skin, that sort of thing.
But he's heard of her. I mean, her reputation precedes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Small town.
So he knew Naomi was back.
Remember, this is poetry. This is a
Okay.
poetic story.
But I'm just,
Even the Bible Project, when they describe it, so they're a more like evangelical kind of group, and they say this is theological poetry is what they call it, which is if you the Baptists went, oh cool, and they're like they didn't think that through all the way.
Poetic license.
There's a lot of poetic license happening here. When I was in school, I'm going to give like a 2-minute version of this. I had to write a paper on the law of the gleaning of the fields. And what year was I? I might have been sophomore. I don't know. It absolutely changed my life. And so it's Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. It's this part where they are commanded to leave the edges of their field unharvested so that the poor and the foreigner could come in and harvest their own grain. And it just absolutely changed my life. We were supposed to write like a 1-page little short story, like a short paper about it, something you might spend an hour on. I spent like 2 weeks. And doing me, it's probably like a 15-page thing or something. I don't know. But we came into class like the next week after we had done this, and they played this video. And this guy was like, well, I own a sawmill, and I read this, and it was, my class was on Leviticus. And they're like, how do we apply the law today? And he said, so in my sawmill, we leave the sawdust on the ground. And so people from his community, which were poor, could collect the sawdust to light their fires. And when I read that, I thought, or when we watched this video, I was like, I feel like he missed the heart of where this is. For people that, like the means of production was having land, like you produce food, the means to it is land. And if you don't own land, you have no access to it. And so by leaving the field, you give others access to work for themselves, to care for themselves. There are ways that we can do that in our society. The way that we access work is things like transportation, healthcare, childcare, even having food, education, those types of things. Those are in our society the way we access working, that we access the means of production. Then that was what I wrote my paper about, on ways that we can do that practically. We don't have time to answer this question, so this will be a food for thought. The law of the gleaning of the fields, Leviticus 19:9-10, command all the landowners to purposely leave grain behind at the edges of the field for the poor and the foreigner. And this command, by the way, it is tied to who God is. After the statement, it's, I am Yahweh your God, and then it moves on to the next one. I mean, this is a serious thing. Leaving grain for people to gather allows people access to the means of production, which they include transportation, education, childcare, healthcare, etc. How can we live out this law today more than a sawmill leaving behind sawdust or us donating our leftover and expired pantry goods to a food pantry? I think there are things we could think about for how that could work. And I will just encourage you to think on that. Adopt this idea of the law of the gleaning. How do you help people be able to take care of themselves? How can you help them to have access to that? And we're going to move on from there. Finishing this section here in chapter 2, Ruth ends up overwhelmed by this kindness. Remember, she's drinking from his spoon. He is saying, stay with my women for protection. Stay in my field. You're going to be taken care of here. And so she's just overwhelmed, and she asks why he would be so kind to a foreigner. And Boaz responds that he has heard of her hesed. You've heard me talk about that as a Greek word. Hesed is loyalty or loving kindness is the word towards Naomi. This is a term that is used to describe the character of God. Yahweh has hesed towards Israel. And now Ruth is a picture of God's hesed towards Israel with her hesed toward Naomi. Very powerful. And then we're going to see that Boaz is going to end up going beyond that letter of the law, just letting her glean. And he is actively offering protection and favor, which is also a picture of God's protection and favor towards Israel. I'm going to change the slide. It's a verse. I'm going to read it like halfway through. This is what he says to Ruth. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from Yahweh, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. He gives this prayer here that God's wings would protect her. And in this very poetic sense, in the next chapter, Ruth is going to ask Boaz to spread his wings over her. And so just as God is the one that protects Israel and now is protecting Ruth, Boaz says, you be the one to do that. It's this other picture of God's protection. Very cool. And so here's also really cool. Boaz invites Ruth to eat with the harvesters, serving her until she's satisfied. She even gets leftovers. I mean, that's really cool too. Here's her eating with him. Ancient agriculture, during harvest season, people would work for like 12 to 14 hours a day, and which sounds like an insane amount. Most of the year, they'd work 4 to 6 hours. They wouldn't work as much. Harvest season, though, was a long shift. And they would come in the morning at sunrise, and the landowner would feed breakfast to the workers. They would work for about 2 hours, and then take a break and have a snack. And he is the one providing the food and the water and everything. Then they'd work for about 2 or 3 hours, finish up the shift until the hot sun, and they would have lunch and take a nap for about an hour. They would take like a big 2-hour break. And then they would work a little bit more, eat dinner, and then finish up whatever is left. That was only for the paid workers. That was not for the foreigner or the poor that were there, just for the paid workers. Naomi is brought into this with the paid workers. She is, again, it's just this overabundance of joy. Also, you don't eat with the foreigner was the practice too. And so that's crazy too. And then to give her leftovers. I mean, that's just insane. He also instructs his workers to intentionally leave behind stuff for her to gather. So he's not just leaving the leftovers. He's throwing it in the walkways, putting bundles down for her. He's giving out extra Twizzlers. He's doing really cool things. I'm sorry I don't have the Twizzlers. And so Ruth ends up returning with like 30 to 50 pounds of food. And if you think about like carrying a bale of hay, have you ever done that before? It wasn't dried out like that, but that's a lot. It's as much as she could carry. And so the generosity, the grace is just overflowing, which again is a picture of God's generosity and grace.
Why didn't the people resent her for being a foreigner and she's getting all the special treatment?
It's poetry.
I think Shakespeare is. I really do.
But if it worked,
Yeah. I mean, after just reading Judges, you're like, what's going on here? It was written a little bit later. And so Naomi's hope ends up getting reignited. She identifies Boaz. The Hebrew word is Goel, which we translate as kinsman redeemer. That essentially means that he has the legal and financial right and means to purchase the land. So if you remember when we were in Joshua, we were ending the book, and there was a family that had no sons, and there was just the daughters. And they're like, hey, if we don't inherit the land, our clan will go away. Because the land, like, think about this as a feudal system. Most people don't own land. The clan or the families own the land. And the firstborn son inherits all of that, okay? And they own everything. And if that is lost, what could end up happening is that one house, one family, one clan could buy up everything and become super powerful. And they could stifle it. They're like a monopoly or something like that. And so here it's provision given to stop that from happening. And so Ruth's husband has died. And Naomi, like from there, Naomi's husband, those clan lands are lost. Those family lands are gone. The kinsman redeemer says, I will marry you and I will have kids and they will continue in the family name from Naomi's family. And so that the lands would still be set straight. What that means for Boaz is that he is like almost giving up his own inheritance. And he's going to have kids through another, like it's going to go through another family name. And so like if I died and Rachel, this is a weird example. I don't know. You guys get what I'm saying though? Like, yeah, okay, all right. That was too weird. So the kinsman redeemer though is not having their own kids. They're having kids under a different family name so that the inheritance can continue down that line. It keeps the clans equal.
Okay, we don't know if Boaz already had children.
He probably doesn't. Yeah, we get the sense he does
and
not.
And so he just thinks he's going to get her pregnant.
Right now, Boaz is just taking care of a foreigner. He has no thought in the story that there's anything else going on like that. When they come back, Naomi goes, ho, ho, ho. I have an idea, like a true grandma getting into everyone's worry. I have this picture actually that I want to show you, and it's a little graphic, but here's Boaz, here's Ruth, and if you've ever seen medieval paintings of Mary or English paintings of Mary, she looks like Mary. I had other art pieces I had collected that were Ruth in the icon styles of Mary, and I lost them. I don't know where they are, and I couldn't find them again. But I look how his eyes are for her because of her purity, not towards anyone else. I love this painting, this depiction of Boaz's character, because he's not just going after a young, beautiful lady. He's going after someone who doesn't belong here. This is a hurt to his own reputation. Nobody wants Ruth. Boaz sees her heart, sees the purity of her heart. There's also this other one. Here's Boaz. This was in the news lately. I had this picture before that. This is white with red on top has always been depictions of Jesus. And I had this picture before that blew up in the news last week or whatever. But this is a Coptic icon. And that's a Coptic style to have the white with the red over it. That's different than Russian or Greek where Jesus is red and blue. But here's Boaz as Jesus because of his generosity and his favor. It's this picture of God's grace. And so Boaz is a cool character too. He has a good heart. as well. Chapter 3, Naomi comes up with this plot for marriage, as we've already touched on. And so she is beginning to move past her own grief. It's really cool. And so she wants Ruth to find her own home. And so she gives her some instructions to very, very specific instructions. She says, wash up, anoint yourself. Oil was expensive. You didn't wear perfume every day. She's making herself desirable. Put on your best clothes and go to the threshing floor where Boaz was. I showed you a few weeks ago, a picture of the threshing floor or the wine press. And if you remember, those were very hidden, secluded, private spots. Some would say romantic if you had a few candles. And Ruth is told to go there after he's eaten. We also get, it's the harvest season. He probably had a couple glasses of wine too. And he's nice and fast asleep. And uncover his feet and lie down. If you read that, or if you had read that before, and you went, that sounds a little raunchy, yes. If you wondered, what does it mean to uncover your feet, in your brain went somewhere you wouldn't think was in the Bible? Yes. Ruth, just like other stories we have read in Joshua and Judges, of women who have little power and use their bodies and what power they have to achieve something, is what's happening here. And it is seen as something like incredibly resourceful. And so she's like a feminist leader because of that. Just like when we read about Jael, who seduces the commander Sisera. And everyone's like, Jael rocks, be like Jael. Use what little power you have to get done what you need to get done to survive. That's sort of what Ruth does here. And if there's any question about what uncovering his feet mean, in the very next section, he was like, you got to get out of here so your reputation's not hurt. And so she seduces Boaz in the threshing floor. Any questions on that? Okay. We had this movie that was about Ruth that I watched all the time growing up. And it's also the characters were a little bit more lively. Like the other guy that we're going to read about at the next chapter was a more prevalent character and stuff. I never realized this was a thing that happened until I was 25. And I was just reading it one day. I'm like, wait a second, uncovered his feet. I don't know what translation I was using, but it was not as euphemistic. So Boaz wakes up. He's a little startled, and she identifies herself and says, spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. She's calling Boaz back to the prayer he made. He said, may God spread his wings over you. Ruth is saying, hey, that was your prayer. You make it happen. You care for me if you're going to care so much. And when she says you are a redeemer, she is saying, be the kinsman redeemer, take my lands and claim me. And so, as we said, it's the same word. I just realized I just said what the second point was. And Boaz is moved by her hesed. She has chosen him. He's an older man, as we already talked about. He probably is. And so he promises to do all, but he says there's a problem. There's a closer relative than me. And the closest relative is who has the rights as the kinsman redeemer. And to protect her reputation, he sends her out and he gives her 6 measures of barley. And so this was a marriage proposal, and he said yes. He even sends him dowry home with some barley. Pretty cool. It's also really cool. Boaz calls Ruth. The Hebrew is, I'm not even going to try it. Eshet Kylie. I don't know how to say that, but it means worthy woman. It's the woman described in Proverbs 31. And so Ruth is seen as this incredibly wise, well-spoken, capable woman, just like the way the book of Proverbs ends. And then you see Ruth as the perfect picture of it. And so if you're looking for a role model, Ruth is your role model. Be like her. Naomi and Ruth now end up waiting. And I really find this part a little bit meaningful. Naomi asks, my translation is, how did you fare, my daughter? The Hebrew is, who are you, my daughter? It's kind of how you would hear it being read. She's saying, are you my daughter anymore, or are you married? I just think that's kind of fun. And so then Naomi ends up telling her to wait. I like this part. They have done all that they can do. They are waiting for their future security. This is a very vulnerable, scary moment. Ruth just put herself out there. If she had been rejected, it could have not ended well for them. That could have ruined her. She staked everything on this with Boaz. just like she staked her whole life being with Naomi. And now they have to wait to see what's going to happen. And they're waiting on God. So this is another one of those moments of God's like provision or God's providence happening. Sometimes when we feel like we need something to get done, we have done all that we can do, and it's our turn to wait. And they have to trust God and others. Like now they have to trust Boaz for something to happen and wait to see what's going to end up. I like that because sometimes it's hard to not do anything. And that's what we are called to do. Chapter 4, they're going to end up at the city gates. City gates would be the public, it's just the public forum, like a marketplace and everything would happen there. And so 10 elders serve as witnesses. He goes to this other guy. I'm curious what your Bibles say. The very first verse of chapter 4. Mine is, no sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate, sat down, than the next of kin of whom Boaz had spoken came passing by. Where it says next of kin, mine has a little note of the Hebrew, and it's Mr. So-and-so is what he calls him. It says, Mr. So-and-so over there. Does any of your Bibles have a note like that? No. This is just there's other funny things with the Hebrew. If you have a Bible that ever tells you some of the Hebrew, you will find most of the Old Testament is funny. And they're making fun of this other guy over here. Like, oh, Mr. So-and-so over there. Yeah. And so this guy is the relative, and they kind of make this little plot. They're like, hey, do you want to get some more land? And he's like, I already own 10 fields. What's one more? I can make more money. He goes, but you got to marry a Moabite. And he's like, I don't want a Moabite. Get out of here. So the passing of the shoe is a way of passing a contract. It's not offensive or something like that. He's not throwing the shoe at him. It's just showing that a transaction is taking place. And that seals the deal. And so, yay, the wedding bells go off. And yeah, they end up getting married in the next section. The text says God gave her a conception. So this is another one of those moments of God's kind of providence coming through. And remember how we began the book? There was no sons and there was death. Now there is new life that is coming out in the midst of that. And the women surround Naomi, and she's no longer bitter. She is Naomi again. She is pleasant. Things have been restored. And also, there's another really cool note I want to bring up. Two references. One, story of Job. It's here in the genealogy that's kind of in the next section. If you remember the story of Job, he loses everything. But he stays loyal to God despite that, and despite his wife who tells him to curse God and die. And so at the end of it, he has restored everything sevenfold. And so Job is this picture of a story. It's a wisdom book about staying loyal to God even when you've lost everything. To not question God, to stay loyal. And what we see in Job, it doesn't always happen, but God will reward you, whether that be in this side of life or in another side of life. And Job gets restored sevenfold. He gets 7 the amount of kids as he had, 7 the amount of wealth, 7 times the amount of food, everything like that. There's a picture of that happens here. And remember, Ruth follows Job in Proverbs 31, which is there vertically. Sevenfold, like this child is sevenfold, the return. It's a reference to Job. There's also this other moment, and I don't know if you saw it. I had a question about it last night, where the baby is given to Naomi. Did anyone read that part? Yeah. Okay. So, two things. One, that just means like grandma's being a nice, loving grandma and helping take care of the baby. Not like a wet nurse or something, but she's going to provide childcare and things like that. There's that sense that that's just normal cultural expectation. There is also this poetic symmetry there, where Naomi, who lost her sons, is given a son again. Like she's like the godparent to this. And so it's this restoration. There's also this really cool note in the genealogy. It says in the first one, now these are the descendants of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron. Hezron of Ram. Ram of Abinadab. Abinadab of Nahshon. Nahshon of Salmon. Salmon of Boaz. Boaz of Obed. Obed of Jesse. And Jesse of David. I know you read that genealogy. That last couple of verses. Perez, this might be one that you would be interested in writing down. So Perez is the son of Judah. And Judah is one of the first 4 sons of Jacob or Israel, is where we are in our timeline sense of this genealogy. Judah was one of the first 4 sons of Israel. This is back in the book of Genesis. And he has 2 sons. He has multiple sons. One son dies. And that son was married to Tamar. And then the kinsman redeemer comes in. And then that son dies. And there's a 3rd son left. And Judah told Tamar, I will give you my 3rd son. You'll be okay. And then just forgets about her. Doesn't care about Tamar. Tamar, being the woman of the day, dresses up like a prostitute, meets Judah at a camp, and seduces him and takes something as payment. That was like his pendant. I can't quite remember. And then as the story unfolds, she's like, ha, Judah, you never took care of me. Look, I have proof that you suck and you came to me. And so Judah's like, fine, I'll marry you. And they have a baby. That baby is Perez. And it's another story of a woman using the power that she has to use something. But it's also this callback to a kinsman redeemer and that leading to a Messiah. And with a foreigner, again, kind of coming up in here. And so that's also might be what this is a reference to. It's there in the genealogy. But the book ends with this legacy that's going to come. And so now we're going to go back from Perez all the way to David. And as we will find out, David is going to lead to Jesus, to the Messiah. And that's really cool. And that's the story of Ruth. It's a short and it's a sweet story. It's more than a romance. It's not really a romance. It's okay if you read it that way, but there's a lot more that happens in there. It's a powerful story of loyalty. We see Ruth's unabiding loyalty to God and to Naomi. I mean, and just in ways that don't make sense. I mean, it can't help but make you feel bad about being unloyal to your friends or family or something. We see Boaz's protection. He lays everything on the line to take care of Ruth. Like he's taking care of a foreigner. That would have been weird back then. Yeah.
That's a little like Moses and the Pharaoh's daughter taking care of him.
Oh.
A lot of similarities.
With the Pharaoh's daughter?
Whoever took care of him when she got him out of the bull.
Oh, Pharaoh's. Yeah. There's also, after his first wife dies, this is funny, and I love irony in the Bible. So he marries an Ethiopian who would have had very, very dark black skin. And his sister goes, why would you marry an Ethiopian? And then she gets struck white with leprosy. So there's like his sister, yeah, Miriam. So there is lots of grievances to racism given in the Bible. I mean, sometimes it's there.
That makes David mixed. I mean, he's not all Hebrew.
No one was. No one was. Yeah.
And yet they were so against intermarriage.
So, and this is where we're getting is what it means to become Israel means anyone who follows God. It doesn't mean who your father was or your mother was. It's anyone who turns to follow God. And that was a conversation that was quite relevant also for the early church. So Ruth is closer to this time where Persians and Greeks are ruling over Israel. Intermarriage with foreigners was more common. That's when Ruth was written, when they're having those conversations take place. Those same conversations take place in our New Testament. When it's about baptism, it's like, do you have to convert to Judaism first? And you have to get rid of your Greek name and get a Hebrew name and then get circumcised. And then you can get, and you're like, no. If you follow God, you follow God. And so, yeah, that's a cool thing. We're going to watch the Bible Project video in a minute. And yet again, we won't do a full discussion, but the story of Naomi, Ruth, Boaz, it's one of loyalty, staying together, inclusion, loving the foreigner, and God's providence, even when it's not easy to see. I am just curious, we won't do a full 5 minutes, but which of those themes maybe stood out to you more in the book of Ruth?
Oh, the Lord. Yeah.
For you is the loyalty? Yeah.
It's hard to decide.
I would be surprised if you said providence.
Inclusion. Talk about that.
That's what I was thinking.
The inclusion?
To the form.
Yeah. And goes like way above and beyond when you expect. And there's these cultural norms there, like the eating together, the drinking from the same ladle and stuff that would be offensive to those.
And I'm just going to say, in times past, the loyalty would have really stood out to me. In our present world, for me, God's providence, even when it's not easy to see, is really resonating with me today. I even had a conversation with someone else about be on the lookout for the blessing that's coming that's not apparent in your circumstances, was basically what I said to her. But that's what stands out to me at this point in my life. But they're all three.
Oh, yeah.
They're all three incredibly fabulous.
When I have read this before, it has been the loyalty and the inclusion that stood out. For some reason right now, to me, it's like this idea that God is watching me,
Yes.
orchestrating things. I might not be able to see it.
Yes.
Sometimes I might be in someone else's orchestration, but I have to be obedient for that. That kind of speaks to me more. And in the way that God protects us and cares for us when we don't deserve it. And we keep spitting in God's face, and God keeps hugging us back. I have a song I want to play for you.
A point.
Yeah.
If you're looking at loyalty and inclusion, those are decisions you as an individual make. God's providence is not something you have any control over other than recognizing it.
Recognizing it, and two other parts. One, I have to be obedient to follow God.
Right.
Because that could be part of something and I don't realize it. And sometimes I just have to wait and not do anything. Because I've done all I can do. That's hard for people that like to fiddle. I want to show you a song. It's a hymn some of you may know, and it's a modern version of it. And I won't play the full thing. I'm going to play about 3 minutes of it. And then we're going to watch the Bible Project video. But it's one about God's love in the same way God loves Ruth and Boaz and their picture of love. And because it's copyrighted, I'm going to turn the camera off.